Thank you all for attending today to hear about this important report, which is an unprecedented look at the NYPD's use of force practices and policies. Before we begin, I want to quickly put the statements by the NYPD that appeared this morning regarding changes that they are making around the use of force in context. For weeks now, we've been briefing the NYPD on serious problems uncovered by our investigation. As such, I'm very pleased that the NYPD has finally agreed to make necessary and long overdue changes to address some of the issues raised in our investigation. That the NYPD has now agreed to make these changes underscores the importance of these reports. However, what is disturbing about our examination of the NYPD's use of force policies and procedures is that it demonstrates that while the NYPD's announcement yesterday is progress, there is still much more that remains undone. Indeed, of the three main areas of our report's focus, monitoring the use of force, training to prevent excessive force, and disciplining officers, the changes announced today only deal with the first issue. We have not seen a detailed plan for proper training, even though our training trails that of most major departments, and discipline remains inconsistent. As our report notes, and as Phil will describe in detail in a moment, in 1/3 of all cases where the commissioner is presented with verified proof of excessive force, he chose to impose no discipline. Therefore, we will continue to monitor these issues until essential, lasting reform is realized. Turning to the report. First and foremost, as law enforcement professionals and as former prosecutors, we understand that police officers will find themselves in situations where they must use force. And when officers must use force to protect lives and preserve public order, they should have our complete support. However, with that trust and support comes the obligation to monitor the use of force consistently, to train on de-escalation and other tactics that reduce the need for force thoroughly, and to discipline willful violations consistently. To date, that has not happened with any consistency or true commitment. We are hopeful that the changes announced by the NYPD are a start in a positive direction. Phil will now take you through the particulars of the report. But we were able to come to our conclusions after a comprehensive examination of 179 cases, where the CCRB determined that officers used excessive force between 2010 and 2014. We looked at accompanying NYPD disciplinary records in more than 100 cases that had reached final disciplinary stage, and we attended and evaluated NYPD trainings, including those at the Academy. This report is not our final statement on this complex issue. We will continue to dig deeper, particularly as the NYPD evolves its practices and procedures in this area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Phil to speak about the Inspector General's on-the-ground investigation.
Thank you, Commissioner. The responsibility and power officers have to use force is tremendous and cannot be taken lightly. Across the country, we've seen incidents of excessive force play out over recent months, and some right here in New York City, and the reverberating calls for reform and change. But when we talk about the task of curbing excessive force, it is important that we discuss all of the relevant policies and procedures that govern how police use that force, how it is defined by the department, how the department and officers report force incidents, how well officers are trained in using justified force and knowing when to de-escalate, and how officers who violate the rules are held accountable. During the course of our review, we found that NYPD has not historically addressed many of these important issues. Let me walk you through a few of our findings. NYPD's current policy on use of force is vague and provides little guidance to officers. It may seem self-explanatory, but nowhere in NYPD's patrol guide is force defined. The guide also doesn't clarify what constitutes excessive force. As far as reporting a forceful encounter once it happens, NYPD operates on a patchwork system that only requires certain force incidents to be documented and can vary from form to form. For example, if an officer uses force during an arrest, it must be reported. However, if an officer is responding to a 911 call and uses force against the person who made the call, and there is no arrest, the officer is not required to report the use of force. NYPD's patrol guide does not instruct officers to de-escalate encounters. In roughly 15% of the cases our investigators reviewed, we determined that officers actually escalated the situation rather than trying to bring it down. De-escalation training is another area in which NYPD must improve. Currently, NYPD training at both the Police Academy and in-service trainings, including the newly created 20K initiative, do not focus on de-escalation. Academy curriculum includes one 9-hour course on the use of force and another 4.5-hour course that features alternative strategies, but only indirectly addresses use of force or de-escalation. And only a portion of that 4.5-hour class focuses on de-escalation out of 486 classroom hours recruits spend in the academy. That's less than 1% of the curriculum. Lastly, NYPD frequently fails to impose discipline even when provided with evidence of excessive force. No discipline imposed in 37 of 104 cases reviewed, we found, or that's 6%, where OIG NYPD's own review confirmed that excessive force was used. NYPD declined to impose discipline in 34 out of 77 allegations over 5 years beginning in 2014. That's 44% of the time. NYPD declined to impose discipline in 3 out of 27 cases after January 2014. That was 11% of the time. NYPD has informed us that it has been reviewing its use of force policies and procedures and that it anticipates making revisions to the patrol guide and other areas of force policy. We were briefed on these policies and believe the proposed changes, when implemented, will address a number of the concerns we raised in the report. And so the recommendations are generally divided into 4 categories. Policy, we propose, NYPD patrol guides should be updated to clarify what is meant by force, excessive force, and deadly force, and require officers to de-escalate in all encounters where appropriate. Also, NYPD should require officers, whether a subject of a force investigation or a witness officer, to document and report all force incidents. With respect to the next area, reporting, NYPD should create a database to track data compiled from the use of force forms and publish an annual report addressing the use of force and the data being collected. With respect to training, NYPD should emphasize de-escalation training and add a specific police academy course on the subject, as well as incorporate scenario-based trainings with an evaluative component. NYPD should also increase funding and personnel at the police academy for both recruits and in-service training. And with respect to the last area, discipline, in disciplinary cases where there are multiple disciplinary charges, each distinct charge should have an accompanying distinct penalty as opposed to an aggregated penalty for all counts. And NYPD should collect data regarding the disciplinary penalties and publish that data, including the number and percentages of cases in which the police commissioner, reduces or declines discipline in force cases.